Hey everybody, this is Chad from Zombie Fight Shark, and this is the fourth tutorial in our CVN Reason series. And in this one, we're going to be exploring Truth by the Chronologists. The piece that's playing in the background was created 100% with CV routing. There is no sequencing of any kind. There are a few happy accidents, and we will explore what exactly is going on here through using Truth and using a Maelstrom. And before we get into it, I'll go ahead and say you can download all the patches here for free at my site, zombiefightshark.net. Click on the Maelstrom Fights Zombie refill and get it so you can follow along on your machine. Obviously this one does require some rack extensions, so you'll need to have a version of Reason that supports rack extensions. Now let's go ahead and get into it and see how this works. Okay, so the first question, here's truth, and what is truth? Not a philosophical question, practical one. Well, it's a logic gate, and here are logic gates. So at this point, if you were like me, you're like, what's a logic gate? Okay, let me look that up. Well, a logic gate is an elementary building block of a digital circuit. Most logic gates have two inputs and one output. At any given moment, every terminal is in one of the two binary conditions, low or high, represented by different voltage levels. So at this point, hopefully some of that makes a little bit of sense. How does that apply in the practical sense when you're making music? So let's break that down by the different gates and what happens when a signal goes in and what comes out. So here's the AND logic gate, and the only way you get a signal coming out of the AND logic gate is when you have a positive signal coming in to both inputs, the A and the B input. So here's the A input, and you have a square wave going in. Then here's the B input, also with a square wave going in at a different speed. And then your output is a combination of those two, but only the positive values. So let's look at that in Reason and see what that actually sounds like. So here we've got a Maelstrom. It's got two square waves on it. This first square wave is set up for quarter notes, and then the second square wave is set up for halves. So if we take a look at the scope for these two, there's the first scope, quarter notes, there's a second scope, halves, and you see how their speed matches, and that's because I've matched speed and zoom on both of these so that you have a 1-to-1 ratio. One is going quarter notes, one is going half notes. And I guess it's worth mentioning, scope doesn't show the vertical lines. Those are just implied. So let's listen to the quarter notes here. What does that sound like? And so this is BPM 120. So now let's take a listen to halves. Alright, so there are halves. These are running through Truth, which is using an AND gate, which is only going to have an output when both are true, which is both one in the positive state, both one in the plus state. And that's what it looks like when they were both combined there. So let's take a listen and see what it actually sounds like. So what we are hearing is the top half of these two sine waves combined. It's just the top part. It's not the whole thing. So it's not a 1 plus 1 equals 2. It's a 1 plus 1 equals x if 1 and 1 are both true. And if that is very confusing to you, then you are normal, because it was confusing to me at first. And what I found is just going through And creating patches and playing around with truth has been the best way for me to understand how this actually works. So let's go on to another one. We won't do every single one of them, but let's do one more. So now we're looking at the A nor B gate, kind of the opposite of the AND gate. The AND gate outputs when both A and B are true, and the NOR gate only outputs when A and B are false. So if you look at the little chart there, that's 0, 0 under A, B, and you see A nor B, 1 underneath it, then that's what that's indicating. You're only going to hear the output when both things are false. And what's interesting is what you hear actually sounds really similar to the gate we just listened to if you listen to an audio example. I'm actually not going to do that this time because it's almost the exact same thing. Instead, let's look at the actual logic of it and see if we can understand that. So there's a sign coming in the top plus your sign at the bottom that's basically going twice as fast, and then that equals almost the exact same image in terms of the wave, but it's actually only where the voltage is in the negative instead of it being in the positive. So if you go all the way back to the first tutorial where we talked about +1 and -1, on, off, and that idea, this would be essentially the -1, the off position, and that's the only time you're getting the output from truth, is when both of them are in the off position on the bottom half of the wave. The more I play with this device, the better I understand it, and it is definitely an ongoing process. So now let's go over the test and out buttons. And just playing with these buttons can drastically change the output of your device. This honestly can be just as confusing as the logic gates. Experimentation is definitely the best way to understand this, but let's see if we can break it down. Maybe we can get there together. So the first button is test. There is a greater than 0 and there is a rising button. And what do those two mean? So the greater than 0 means that truth will output if the CV is greater than 0. So not a negative number, it has to be above 0. The rising button means truth will output if the CV is rising. So let's look at a quick example. So here is a sine wave and a square wave going into truth, and then we've got a scope at the bottom that shows. The thing to look at here is the crest of the sine wave, the top of it, and then the top of the square wave, and those line up. And then if you look at the post-truth scope at the bottom, that's the output. The top of that wave is the output. The middle is a 0, the top is a +1. Now if we change it to rising, you look at the post-truth scope, and now that output is actually aligned with the upslope right there of the sine instead of being just the top. So that gives you an idea of what the greater than 0 or the rising test buttons do. So for the final piece, we're going to discuss the out buttons, of which there's a binary, a difference, a maximum, and a minimum. And I personally find that these seem to affect the output of your wave almost more than anything else than changing gates. So let's go through them. So first we have binary, and either you're going to have a 0 or a 1 output. Even if it's a sine wave or some kind of strange noise wave, doesn't matter. You're only going to get a 0 or a 1 that is output when you have this button selected. Next is the difference, and that's going to be the difference between the A and the B wave, again in an absolute value, in a 1 or a 0 or a -1 in this case. So no in between, but it's taking the difference between the two waves. That one's a little bit harder to understand, but as soon as you start playing with that setting, you see it actually has a lot of power and is really interesting. For the max setting, you're going to get either A or B, whichever is greater, coming out. So you're generally going to get the top half of the wave, generally speaking, and it could be either or, whichever is going to be greater. So if they're alternating, you'll get half of one, half of another, just whichever is always the greater of the two. And then finally, for the minimum, it's the opposite, like you would expect. You're going to get whichever is lesser of the A and the B wave, the bottom half of the wave, if you will. And again, you just have to play with this because this is one of those that is really confusing and you can get really amazing stuff at the same time. But this is some of the very basic theory behind it. Hopefully this has helped you to understand. So I want to thank you very much for having taken the time to watch and listen to these tutorials, and hopefully you've experimented along with me as I've explained this stuff, or tried to explain it anyway. It is confusing. It is definitely confusing. This is not the sort of thing that most people will get on their first, second, third, fourth, or fifth try. You have to revisit it. It can be, it's very complex. So what I would say is just definitely give it a try. Don't give up on it because there's some really interesting and weird worlds to explore with all of this CV stuff, and you can add a new dimension to your own music making. So as this outro music plays, I'll just say one more time, there's several patches here that are available for free on the site, zombiefightshark.net, and I encourage you to go download that refill, play with the patches that are in there. There'll be some starter patches that you can kind of mess around with even further. Hey, send me links to your music because I want to hear what you do with CV once you've got a handle on it, because I'm continually learning, and that's part of what makes this fun, is that you just keep working at it, and you don't know what you don't know, and you go into some pretty fun and unusual places. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.